Hello, this is the Gemsbach, and today's topic is Spelunky HD, a game developed by Mossmouth and originally released in 2012. The first version of Derek Yu's Spelunky, a platforming game about exploring a heavily randomized and inhospitable treasure-packed cave system, appeared as a freeware game in 2008, and it soon became a beloved piece of software for many gamers in the know, including acting as one of the biggest influences on Edmund Macmillan's design for the original Binding of Isaac. Derek Yu then turned his attention, enlisting the help of Andy Hull under the Mossmouth heading, to producing a ground-up HD remake of Spelunky, and its release garnered a victory in the design category of 2012's IGF, followed by PC Gamer naming Spelunky's PC release their Game of the Year for 2013. That second accolade resulted in a fair amount of controversy, with gamers all over the internet commenting concerns about how a simple 2D indie game could possibly beat all of the massive studio games that released on PC in 2013, including Dead Space 3, Crysis 3, the Tomb Raider reboot, Dota 2, Metro Last Light, Rayman Legends, Assassin's Creed 4, and BioShock Infinite. If you've been following this channel, then you've already got a pretty good idea of my personal reaction to those negative comments. Principally, I was forced to assume that most of those commenters were merely judging the game by its cover art, as it were, and had not actually played it. As it stands, I would not only concur that Spelunky was the best game released in 2013, but I would go yet further and say that Spelunky is one of the best games I have ever played. To explain why, I will now compare Spelunky to what is perhaps the quintessential platformer, the original Super Mario Bros. In that PC Gamer article mentioned earlier, Editor-in-Chief Evan Lottie had this to say: Spelunky is our Mario. It hasn't had the same impact, although it's fun to imagine what gaming would be like if Spelunky had been released in '85, but it's far and away the most important platformer to ever grace the PC. As an FPS player, what I appreciate most is how well-tuned the subtleties of movement, distance, and danger are in Spelunky. Now, I would not necessarily agree with the phrase far and away there, as I consider Tommy Refenes and Edmund Macmillan's Super Meat Boy a not-too-distant second, and an extensive list of other great 2D indie platformers not too far further. But otherwise, his comparison is totally apt. What the original Super Mario Bros. Provided in terms of challenge, level design, and secrets, Spelunky satisfyingly delivers. I may have confused some viewers just now when I switched from complimenting Spelunky's game design to complimenting Spelunky's level design, as, you may be aware, Spelunky is partially a roguelike, and its individual level layouts are randomized. In what sense, then, is the level design as strong as that in Super Mario Bros.? Well, to simply label it random is to be a bit misleading. There are a huge number of individually designed level pieces, which are shuffled and slotted together to make each run's levels. These level chunks had to be designed in such a way that they would fit together in almost any orientation and remain both navigable and interesting. Moreover, each of the game's 5 principal sections have their own design styles, not just aesthetics, so that making your way through the densely constructed and threatening jungle, for instance, feels totally different from leaping through the expansive and looser ice caves. For all of its randomization, Spelunky remains a game with a carefully established gameplay rhythm and carefully governed level design logic. But Spelunky having similarly careful level construction to Mario is certainly not where the comparison ends. Before returning to closer analysis, it is interesting to note the various ways in which Spelunky actually has a lot of surface-level overlap with classic Mario. Both games feature a platforming adventurer who breaks blocks. Both characters face hordes of enemies with simple and clearly defined movement logic rather than intricate AI. Both defeat many of those enemies by jumping on their heads. Both can cross one-tile gaps when the run button is held. Both can access later areas of the game via shortcuts. Both rescue damsels and bachelors in distress. Both seek refuge in tunnels. And both ultimately defeat the end boss by dumping it into a pit of lava. Now, moving on to the controls, it is no surprise to me that Derek Yu cites the Super Mario Bros. Series as one of Spelunky's biggest feel influences, as the care that went into the physics and controls of Spelunky are reminiscent of Nintendo's work at its very best. The characters' movements are responsive and weighty, with a predictable yet controllable jump height. The jump height in question is considerably smaller than is the jump length, making ascent inconvenient and reinforcing the game's downward momentum. The feeling of moving through the world in Spelunky is smooth and predictable, and I think these aspects of the movement are what Evan Lottie meant when he mentioned the movement being well-tuned. As for tone, there is a feeling when you pick up a Nintendo franchise for the first time that you are in for something that is purely about joy. This is not to say that Nintendo games are always easy, although they often are, but beating Super Mario Bros. Without warp zones is challenging. Beating The Legend of Zelda without a walkthrough is challenging. Getting the best ending in the original Pikmin is challenging. It's less about whether a game is tough, as there are great games across all levels of difficulty. It's more about whether a game is fun. In such Nintendo titles, story is secondary to mechanics, and thematic content is secondary to cultivating immediate player happiness. Nintendo's art assets are often bright and cartoonish, their color palettes often warm, and their music often jaunty and upbeat. There are a few notable exceptions, like Metroid, but those are nevertheless the conventions that dominate Nintendo's offerings. Spelunky has that same joyous, light-hearted tone and aesthetic design. Don't get me wrong, I am the first person to rush to the defense of great games that are not conventionally fun or entertaining, but that does not preclude me from relishing both. Just as I can enjoy the films of John Landis on some occasions, and the films of David Lynch on other occasions, so I would like to play games with a wide variety of genres, mechanics, and ambitions. Sure, I can imagine a close reading of Super Mario Bros. As being some kind of allegory for romantic aspirations. And I can imagine a close reading of Spelunky as having something to say about the difficulty, absurdity, and potential cultural atrocities of acquiring wealth. But unlike when playing a game like Dark Souls or Infinifactory or Spec Ops: The Line, I do not feel compelled by Spelunky to consider its sparse, loosely implied thematic content while playing. In the case of Spelunky and Mario, and all of their lesser relatives, these potential thematic functions are extrapolations from, or at least subdued psychological implications of, a set of attributes which more readily appear to provide a mechanism for imparting a simple, satisfying, fun experience. An adventure, and in that regard, they never disappoint. In this section, I will be discussing the ways in which Spelunky differs from Super Mario Bros. As I've already discussed at some length, however, the randomized levels and high difficulty are not really big differences between the two at all. The key difference between Spelunky and the Mario series, then, is not in the game's roguelike elements. It is worth pointing out that the lives in Super Mario Bros. Are as scarce as health in Spelunky, and that running out of them does indeed send you all the way back to the very beginning. Insofar as there is any big difference between the two, it resides in Spelunky's straying from Super Mario Bros. Purity, where Mario's only mechanic, except for his occasional power-up or swimming segment, is his platforming. What Spelunky gives up in terms of fidelity to platforming, however, is more than made up for by the quality of the three primary additions that are made. First, there is the item system, which grows organically from Spelunky's highly interactive environments. The rope and bomb resources, and the arsenal of upgrades and active items, add additional texture to different runs while opening up the gameplay into something constantly malleable. Furthermore, the items themselves are often balanced in some fashion, like the lightning fast, but dangerously unwieldy teleporter, and may have hidden benefits, like the kickback of the projectile weapons, allowing for a precise high jump. Second, there is Spelunky's extensive network of secrets. Mario's various shortcuts and bonuses pale considerably in comparison to the hidden depths of Spelunky. Everything from a haunted castle to a sacrifice mechanic to the game's true final boss to several more bizarre regions and elements are interspersed into the levels with varying degrees of hiddenness. These secrets are enmeshed into the game in such subtle yet discernible ways that they expand the longevity of the game's intrigue without harming the impeccable cohesion of the base game. Third, one area where Spelunky may even be said to surpass Super Mario Bros., if you will forgive such blasphemy, is in its scoring mechanic, which feels much more fleshed out and integrated into gameplay than Mario's score counter ever did. In addition to feeling perfectly matched to the game's chosen aesthetic, the treasure doubling as the score incentivizes the player to take on the considerable extra risk of robbing the game's zealous, violent shopkeepers, Further, the high-risk, high-reward practice of ghosting gems, which means using the one-hit KO ghost enemy to turn gems into valuable diamonds, opens the door for dedicated players to optimize their runs beyond all reason. Spelunky also boasts several non-essential but amazing features, including frustratingly wonderful local co-op, intimidating daily run leaderboards, and a frenetic local deathmatch mode. In closing, it is a testament to the excellence of this game's design that I could spend this entire video with barely more than a nod toward the game's graphics and music, which are thoroughly appropriate to the game's mix of lighthearted fun and mysterious adventure, and which complete the crisp execution of this flawless title. That a game with this caliber of gameplay and this level of cohesive execution could be the work of one or two human beings makes it all the more embarrassing that entire teams of people often produce significantly worse games. In addition to its mastery of Derek Yu's preferred parts of the Mario formula, Spelunky draws on strengths from greats like La Mulana and Castlevania, with a heaping helping of its own original style and substance. It is a game where a win is truly earned, and it is a game which I am always proud to beat. It is a game that is different every time, but in which no element ever seems out of place. Spelunky is a clean execution of a top-notch design, and anyone who has ever enjoyed a platforming game would be doing themselves a tremendous disservice if they never play it.